May the force be with you guys.
Yeah.
And you as well.
Yeah. So, welcome, Fret Buzzards.
Yeah.
We're here today with a special guest signing in from Phoenix, Arizona, Mr. Brent Barker, who just released his EP. And we're going to talk about how to develop and maintain an original voice, sound, and style in the face of an ever-changing music industry.
Sounds great. Let's get into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could talk about this from a lot of different angles. So, you could talk about the tone of your guitar all the way through the types of music you're playing. And, like we're saying, the industry is constantly changing and we've got to evolve to keep up, but we still want to sound like ourselves. And I know each of us, I've heard both of you guys play. I know you've got a distinct sound to you. And so any thoughts?
I know for me, it's I know I've talked about this on past episodes, and this could probably go against what a lot of other people say, but I think for me as an artist, I just don't care. I know that's kind of harsh, but I often kind of find that the more that I start looking at everybody else and using that as my guideline, I start getting away from who I am as a true musician. And I usually for myself look to my inner soul. I definitely celebrate other people for what they do. But when it comes to my own style and my own writing, I try not to listen to all the buzz. I try to just kind of stay true to my own self. I don't know. How do you guys feel?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think when you start to view it as a popularity contest and you're measuring yourself against what the most popular thing is of the day, you've already lost, because then you're not you anymore.
Correct. Yeah.
So I've read some really good articles about being true to yourself and recognizing that the majority of people want to feel safe, and it's much safer to feel like you're not being judged.
Right.
And as soon as you put yourself out there, you expose yourself to be judged if you're really being true to yourself.
Yes.
So it takes a little bit of courage.
Yeah.
Right. It's kind of like your attitude a little bit, it kind of takes that.
Yeah. And I think I think age has to do with that. I think at a younger age, coming through as a musician, it's harder to do that. I think as the older I get, I kind of do have this attitude of whatever. And I don't know if that's just wisdom or if that's just stupidity, but I definitely feel as though the older I get, I just don't care as much anymore.
Yeah, it's called the I don't give a damn quotient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Changes.
Yeah.
Based on where you're at.
Yeah.
But all the great artists that we talk about as players have all had the courage to really do that and be different.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell looking back on it, but when somebody comes out and you're there to kind of witness it when they come out and they make a really big impact, chances are they're doing something very different. And it seems like a brilliant idea when everybody rallies around them and loves it. But, at one point they had no fans, they had no record, they had no followers, they had no nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. We always got to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
That's very true.
It is very hard to put yourself out there. I mean, it is. Even if you do have the attitude of I don't care, it is still hard. It is still hard to kind of be true to yourself. And there are moments of self-doubt. And but I think honestly, at the end of the journey, the only way that I can be satisfied and be truly happy with what I've laid out is to be just that. Very, very true to myself and know that what I've done is all me. And I can take influences for sure, but always kind of pulling it back into my own self and saying, okay, this is who I am. And yes, definitely pushing yourself in certain areas of writing or performing or whatever it is, because that's going to help you expand as a musician and kind of take on new ideas and new roles. Absolutely. But yeah, it definitely is hard at times.
So I've got a little different take on this. Because I play at so many different places, I tend to have several styles that I kind of dip into. Like if I'm playing a jazz gig, I have a very distinct style. Like it sounds like me in my jazz mode. And then when I play a bar gig, I have my overdrive sounds. I have my, the type of delay I put on my guitar.
Yeah.
And so it really depends on the gig. And I have my acoustic sound I'm developing, but I tend to change, and really it depends on the song and what people are getting into. I definitely change. I have specific overdrives that I really like, though. I can say is the one thing that's really consistent.
Right. Right. Have you changed that throughout the years at all in terms of where it was before, in terms of where it is now?
In terms of the tone of my guitar?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I have my old Fender Hot Rod Deluxe sitting beside me. I used to use that Fender drive channel all the time, and I'd put a little TS 808 tube screamer on top of it.
Oh, yeah,
if I
yeah.
wanted to give it a little bit more snarl.
Mm.
And I used to use a Stratocaster all the time, which had a very distinct sound. I've really switched. I played my semi-hollow, my 335, 95% of the time now, and I use this Keeley Red Dirt Germanium pedal.
Yeah.
That I feel like gives the guitar a really smooth overdrive, and I can really, it'll break up a lot if I want it to, but it can also, if I pull the gain down,
Yeah.
it sounds a little bit like I can use it in more of a coffee shop or a retirement home vibe, just to get it to break up a little.
How about you, Brent? Has your tone, your character changed over the years?
I've been playing the exact same setup since the 90s.
Yeah.
So I've got some very rare Soldano preamps there are only a couple hundred of them made.
Yeah.
And I actually had Mike Soldano modify them when he had his shop in Van Nuys, California.
Mm-hmm.
And I've still got those. I run those through an all-tube power amp made by a company called VHT that I don't think is out there anymore. But the owner, Stevie Fryatt, also modified the power amp for me. So I've got some very rare customized gear, and it gets a very distinctive sound, and I just love it. And people listen to it and they tell me that it sounds like very classic hard rock, and it sounds very different than what's out there now. So I mean, like we were talking about earlier, like I had a choice. I just finished a record. I could have gone in and said, well, what's big now? Animals as Leaders, Polyphia, Jason Richardson, guys that just shred all day long and have a very different style than what I do. Or should I be true to myself? And I chose to do something that's me, even though it's not consistent with what's, I think, popular at the moment.
Right.
So, but I had this conversation with somebody else too. Sometimes I feel as though I've played through other things too. Like I show up at gigs and they've just got a Marshall, and yet when I plug into that, it still sounds like me. There's certain things that I think we don't give enough credit to our fingers and our ear.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's more than half of it.
Oh, it is.
I think all three of us could plug into each other's amps and it would still sound like us.
No, it always comes down to the player.
Yeah. Yeah, it does come down to the player. So the gear helps, once you add all the things together and it's the player and it's the gear that you like, maybe it gives it an extra 10%, but a lot of it comes from the fingers and the way that you want to hear things. I mean, I think you do need a certain level of overdrive if you're a rock player.
Yeah, that sustain allows you to do so much,
Yeah, because it forces it will lead to different melodies because you've got the flexibility to hold notes the way a horn player would. You don't really have that, like if you're going for a traditional jazz sound. So I think that definitely has an effect on your playing. But I've also got an old. It's kind of like I guess it might be comparable to a Hot Rod Deluxe. It's a Fender Tweed Deluxe kit that I built with my brother-in-law.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And so if I want to break out something that just has a classic rock sound for a particular gig, like what you were saying, I could do that. And I found a really great power attenuator too, to use it where you can turn it all the way up, because those amps, you really have to turn them all the way up. That's the way the old blues guys do it, right? It's just everything on 10.
Yeah.
I saw Magic Slim from Chicago play. They just old Fender amp, everything on 10, everything.
Yeah.
So this kind of allows you to do that, but
The
we'll use that off.
They're really cool. My Hot Rod Deluxe, if I turn it in my room, it's set at 2.5 out of 12. And
Right.
it just doesn't sound right. But at a gig, I might be able to turn it up if I'm playing solo to like 3, maybe a little bit more. If I'm with a band, maybe I'm at 5 if I'm lucky.
Right.
Because, half the time they have, the PA system, they're micing your amp anyway, and they don't want you to turn up.
Right.
Brutal.
Right.
So I actually went and got a Princeton Reverb 68, and I can push that way easier. I can turn up to, it starts to break up around 4.5 out of 10, and that's reasonable with at a gig. It's not that loud. So 1 10-inch speaker. Having a smaller speaker really, really helps if you want to break up.
10-inch speaker, huh? Yeah.
Yeah, it's so nice. Not good for jazz. Not good for jazz if you're trying to turn up.
Yeah, right.
Brent, I notice you've got a usually delay. Do you have anything you like to use specifically?
As far as effects?
Yeah, I was listening to your EP.
Yeah, there's a little more buried in there that you can't really hear. Like there's a song I did called "Her," and I was at Blackbird Studios in Nashville.
Yeah.
And one of the appeals about that place is they have a room that contains pedals on like 8 different warehouse shelves going back about 20 feet. And it's everything from like early electro harmonics pedals, like they had, the Electric Mistress, they had Memory Man, they had like all of this stuff going all the way up to today. And so I took from that. So I used a Phase 90 on the rhythm guitar tracks to one of the songs called "Her."
Yeah.
I used something that I can't even remember the name of it. It was the most obnoxious looking pedal I could find, and he said, "Well, it sounds kind of like Hendrix," and so I said, "I want that one."
Yeah.
And so did kind of an octave delay thing, which is hard to hear, but it's also on that same song, "Her." And
it was on your lead of "Her," the lead guitar.
It was it's on this melody part where it kind of sounds like it's going to octaves in the middle of the song, and so we used that. I used a MXR flanger on the acoustic guitar on the second song, "Blue Careless." I used a few things. I definitely kind of stole liberally from their bag of tricks, although it's not really obvious. You kind of have to listen to it, I think, with headphones to hear some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Back here, like, my main setup, what I'm using for gigs is a very simple setup. I've got an old Real McCoy wah pedal, which gives a really, and I didn't use it on my solo EP, but it gives a very Hendrixy kind of a wah.
Right.
It sounds very late 60s. I've got a Phase 90, and then I use an Eventide H9. And the interesting thing about that is it's got great delays, but it's also got some good modulation effects. It's got a great chorus, it's got a great flanger on it, and it's MIDI controlled. So with that, I can have one pedal, and it kind of gives me a nice little variety.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're right. You're playing a Jackson guitar usually?
Yeah, I've got 2 Jacksons. They're both vintage San Dimas Jacksons. Just nothing sounds like. When you go to a store today and you pick up, it feels like a totally different instrument if you were picking up a Jackson.
Yeah.
Love Jackson. Love them.
I've never really played on a Jackson.
Oh, they're wonderful. They're fast.
Yeah. They're kind of that perfect mix between a Strat and a Les Paul, because at least the body wood on mine is mahogany, very heavy, and so you've got that kind of dark tone, and it's a humbucker, but it's shaped like a Strat, and so you kind of got that fast feel.
You got a really wide radius, right? So it's a really flat fretboard.
And it's kind of flat in the back too. Like some of the Strats you have, they feel kind of like a baseball bat a little bit.
Yeah.
So this is a little more sleek, a little thinner. So yeah, it's fast. And they stay in tune really well, which is always like, go back to the fundamentals and the basics. You're out on the road, you're playing in different weather and different humidity. You need something that's built rock solid, that's going to stay in tune.
Yeah.
5, 6, 7, 8 songs into the set.
It sound good, like if you don't have drive on it? Got a good clean sound?
It does. Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. sounds great without even being plugged in. That's how you know you got a great guitar. Right? Don't even plug them in. You get one that sounds great, feels great without being plugged in, then you're just, you're golden.
Yeah. I got away from my Jackson only because the Floyd Rose started to, I don't know, for some odd reason I started to have some issues with Floyd Rose. I just wasn't digging it as much as I got older in life. I kind of like that fixed bridge, but I definitely enjoy the Floyd Rose, but I kind of veered away from it more as I got older.
You normally play, you're a Strat guy now.
Yeah,
with those hot rods.
Yes.
You don't have the Seymour Duncan, you've got the other company, right?
DiMarzio? Yeah, DiMarzio's.
Yeah, this help beef up the Stratocaster.
Yep, hot rails.
Are you still playing through your Vox most of the time, Aaron?
Yeah, for the most part. Now that I've got the deluxe, I've been kind of toying around with that a lot lately. I'm just kind of just playing with tones, and I I got to stop, but I keep on buying amps.
An addiction, right?
Oh my God,
we all got it.
I know. It's so addicting. I'm like, I got to stop buying amps. At least I got to start selling the ones, but I can't. I'm just like, oh, I got to own them all.
Right. You'll want it. You'll need it.
Yeah.
Someday you'll have a studio gig and you want the perfect amp for it. You're not at Blackbird Studios.
Yeah, right.
It's funny, in the Kairos Quintet, Aaron and I, Brent, played in a band together back several years ago, and we were both playing guitar. And we would sometimes be playing harmonies to each other, and you could always, it was so obvious who was playing because our tones were just so distinct. But yeah, Aaron, you always had that. Usually you were playing through your Vox back then.
Yeah. Well, I was into a darker tone at that point. I was kind of playing with this whole Vox, and it's got that really smooth, warm sound that I really enjoy out of a Vox, the AC30.
Yeah, yours was scooped more. I had a lot more mid, so it sat well together.
Yeah, we played well together because what sonic space I took, you played the opposite of that sonic space. So yeah, they married well together.
Yeah.
Is there a rhythm? Do you play with the rhythm guitarist in your band, Brent?
No.
Okay, so you're all solo lead.
Guitar. I've done projects though with other guitarists though.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely important to look at your tone versus the other guitar player's tone if you're going to do a 2-guitar project like what you guys are talking about, because it can sound really beefy if you get 2 players that kind of going for different tones.
Yeah,
I just try to, since it's one guitar, I try to make it sound as big and fat as I possibly can. So that's the goal, right? It's it's the holy grail quest, never ends.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. That's for sure.
Yeah, and even when you think you found it, you show up in a new room and you're like, you can't find it sometimes.
Yeah.
Brent, are you playing out in a trio a lot of the time?
I am. I'm typically playing with just a bass player and a drummer. So trio. And then I'm involved in a couple of different things right now. So I'm working on an album with a singer named Keith St. John, who sang for Montrose. He's currently the singer for Kingdom Come, with the drummer currently from Kingdom Come, James Kotak, who's from the band Scorpions.
Yeah.
And so we've been recording. We recorded 3 songs in LA about a month ago or so. And that again is going to be a traditional 4-piece classic rock sound, guitar, bass, drums, vocals. I still wind up, even though it's one guitar, and I've tried just about every possible combination. I still think it sounds best to double track guitars, rhythm guitars. Maybe it's just from growing up in the 80s or what have you, but I think you get a great guitar sound, you double it. And I've never found anything that actually beats that.
No.
A tone,
Yeah, it really is. And it may have something to do with growing up through the 80s and just getting that sound. But you're absolutely correct. There is absolutely nothing that replaces that double tracked guitar. I mean, it just doesn't.
No,
warm, and it doesn't sound fake. It doesn't sound electronic. It doesn't sound like some of the chorus pedals at a certain are useful for big open chords, but sometimes they can also sound a little sterile, or I'm not sure what the word is. You guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Mechanical.
Yeah.
So are you double tracking and panning one right and one left?
And hard right and hard left. Always. And I play it to it's hard to tell unless you've got on earphones. I don't think you can, it's not really obvious, you know, if you track them tight enough. It's just gives that extra something.
You know,
like the amp that goes to 11. It's just, there's something about it, man. 2 is always better than 1. And, you know?
Yeah.
Do you ever set one back a little bit? I know with vocals, I've done that in the past. Like just
so you double track and set one back kind of in the back. I've done that too, and that's interesting too. That you can get a little more dynamics that way. Kind of bring it up into the forefront if you've got a big power chord, and then let it lay back a little bit in verses.
Yeah.
I mean, it just sounds thicker. I mean, it's almost like a delay, but like a single slapback delay.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, just like taking the 2 tracks and just scooting one of them back just a teeny bit.
Right, like 5-10 milliseconds, something like that. 20 milliseconds. Yeah.
Sometimes that really fattens it up.
Yeah.
What's the right amount of time to do that? 5 or 10 milliseconds, you think?
Any more than that, you start getting into an actual delay, and you feel like there's actually a slapback. You start pushing it, just nudging, and you'll hear it. I mean, use that nudge factor, and the longer you go, you start feeling that slap, and you just pull it in just a little bit, and it's starting to kind of thicken it up just a little bit. Yeah, I know with Pro Tools, I've definitely played around with that quite a bit.
Yeah, and I really like it on vocals. It helps a lot.
Have you guys found a pedal that does that?
Not like what I'm thinking of.
Silence.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Right? Yeah, I mean, you can try, but I don't know that you're actually going to achieve it.
Yeah, nothing sounds right. My delay pedal, if I set a really fast delay, it doesn't sound like what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It still sounds like a ba-ba. It sounds, you can hear that second one.
Yeah. I mean, you could always try doing like a stereo split out of the guitar and doing like 2 amps or something like that. And that might give you what you're looking for. Actually, I've got a guest who's coming on the show in the future who's actually working on building an amp that's in stereo, which would be kind of interesting to.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Every so often I see him about every month, and he shows me what he's working on, and he's getting closer because there's actually not too many people actually out there right now. I think there's 1 or 2 companies that actually put out a stereo amp. But yeah, it's very rare that you can actually find one, and it's got that thick sound. It's very interesting. It's very cool.
Actually, my role.
I think the problem, I've been experimenting with this, just trying to kind of replicate that sound that you get in the studio with double tracking guitars. And so, my current setup is running stereo through 2 Soldanos into the VH, which is a stereo power amp, and I can make one wet and one dry.
Yeah.
And the missing link to doing that, at least that I found so far, is the guitar's impedance isn't meant to drive 2 amps on its own.
Right.
That's why when you plug into any kind of a pedal and it says there's a right and left output, stereo output, it just kind of thins up your sound a little bit if you go back and record it and listen to it. Even though the effects might add some space to it, you're kind of missing some power,
right,
and a little bit of tone. And so I found this thing by Michael Wagner called an MW1 studio tool, and it solves that problem. It solves that impedance problem.
Oh, very cool.
It's a rack mount unit, and what he uses it for, is he's a producer, is to take it in the studio to run into an amp and then have a separate out that runs to the board and is clean, that can be reamped. So he did it as a producer so that you could record with, your Fender Princeton, and then you could reamp it through 10 different other amps and, in the studio. So he kind of solved that problem. So using that through 2 amps is the best thing that I've come across, because it sounds natural. It's the closest. It still doesn't, I'm still not completely satisfied with it. It will be. But it's the closest thing I found.
Chasing it.
Hey, well, like we're all going for that last 1%. We're all 99%. There's that extra 1% to be 100.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, absolutely.
Talent.
But even if our fans and the people in the audience can't tell, it just feels good when you sound like you want to sound it. I think it helps me play.
Yeah, it makes you play better, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You're not thinking, man. You can just get into the moment of actually playing music
Mm-hmm.
which is not thinking at all.
Right. Right. That's exactly right. You're in it. You are speaking the language. It's just a fluent thing that just happens in the moment. Yeah.
Well, we've been really focused here on tone from a mechanical amps pedals perspective. However, we could look at this from a whole different way. You brought it up at how it's in the fingers, but stylistically, I mean, at some point we all really try to sound, or at least try to incorporate the sounds of our favorite players, and then we, morph that sound into our own thing. And I think Aaron and I and Tony have talked about this in the past, but Brent, who have you really studied and tried to incorporate specific stylistic elements of their playing?
I think the players that I consciously tried to learn everything that I did because I was a kid and I was just trying to learn how to play guitar as best I could. And there were great players when I was learning to play, are not necessarily players that I sound like today. But for me, that would have been Eddie Van Halen and Randy Rhoads. Eddie Van Halen for having, like, still to this day, probably one of the best classic rock guitar sounds, and Randy Rhoads for kind of taking a different approach, a much more melodic,
right,
compositional type of approach. Although I listen back to my record, and to me, it doesn't sound like either of those two guys. But those were my big influences when I started. And I think once you kind of get past learning the mechanics of your favorite player, you start to get more at the kind of the essence of what they're doing. Like, I hear Eddie Van Halen now, and I think to myself, he sounds like a sax player. You can forget about the tapping or how he's doing it. I hear very fluid legato sounds with a lot of notes using the bar that could have been performed by somebody playing saxophone. And so that element, I think, is consistent in my playing. I do kind of the same thing, although it doesn't sound like Eddie Van Halen. So I think once you reach a certain point where you've kind of learned from your influences, you kind of set all that to the side and you just kind of meditate, and then you're going to come up with some licks that sound really cool to you, that give you a certain amount of energy, and you just focus on those and do those over and over and over. And eventually it's like building a house. You've laid down the foundation, and now you're adding some bricks, and then before you know it, you're remodeling the kitchen.
Yeah.
It's
interesting. I heard when I was listening to some of your tracks, I can't remember which track it was in, but I heard a little bit of stuff that I associated with, like, some of Paul Gilbert's runs and some of Satriani's kind of legato style, because we talked a lot about Satriani last week. But I definitely heard some patterns that I thought that's where they might have come from, at least that influence. Do you listen to those guys at all?
I've heard them, of course, and I think Satriani is like one of the great songwriters, like, which he doesn't get credit. Everybody thinks of him as a guitar player, but I think he's so well known because he's a great writer. And Paul Gilbert, I've seen live multiple times in LA. He's just a beast monster. So I'm honored that you would compare anything that I've done to those two guys. They're awesome. But I didn't learn from either of them. I've never learned a Paul Gilbert song or a Satriani song. Yeah. But I think they're awesome.
So in terms of kind of just going down that route, that brings up a question for me. Since we're talking about Satriani and Paul and Vi and all these instrumental rock players, where do you, Brent, see instrumental rock, a guitar, going in the future?
I think it's going to get more and more popular, because there's one thing we can all agree about guitar is it's unlimited. Every day that you pick up your instrument and you just kind of get into the zone, it's endless. It's so endless. And when think about classical music, which has survived hundreds of years, it's great compositional, it's great melodies. Like you just mentioned Joe Satriani. I think people will be listening to his music a couple hundred years from now because he's such a great writer. I think it takes, what I would like to see is more great writing happening on guitar rather than just flat out shredding. Yeah. But I think there's some great stuff that's out there now, instrumental wise.
Yeah, I have said multiple times on the podcast that I feel, in my own personal opinion, that I see that the music industry is really pushing rhythm rather than melody and composition. I hear a lot of rhythm-based things happen. You had mentioned like animals as leaders and things like that. Um,
Mhm.
I hear and feel a lot of this rhythm-based stuff happening, and it's really happened within the past, I'd say, 20 years, where this rhythm thing happens, where maybe it's just this, one tone, and they're just like riffing on it in different patterns, and whether it's, and that whole the whole melodic and compositional thing seems to have subsided, at least in my opinion. Um, it, I don't see that happening as much. I don't know why that is, but at least that's my observation. I would love to see the rock guitar and the composition part of it, the theory end of it, really play a big part in the future. I would love to see that. And I think that a lot of that is that the record companies are paying three guys to go into a room for the next, 5 to 8 hours and write a couple things, and whatever comes out on the other end of it, cool, we'll sell it because it sells. The long gone are the days of, sitting in a studio for months and months and creating this masterpiece. It does happen, but definitely not on the wide scale that it was happening 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, and we might not know. I mean, there could be some music that's out there that's not popular today that 50 years from now could be the next, Beethoven. It's classic and just wasn't popular during the lifetime of the artist. Time is always the true test.
Yeah, and it's definitely out there. My point more along the lines is that the popular, it was very accessible 40 years ago, where it was all over the place. It was, Eddie Van Halen was a household name, as Joe Satriani was a household name. These guitar greats, everybody knew who they were, and they were on the radio. They were being played. Now that doesn't happen. The whole popular music is such a different landscape than what it was. I know that we have talked about, even with something like Steely Dan, and they had the whole jazz kind of thing being incorporated. That was on popular radio. That was pop music.
Mhm.
That doesn't happen now. And that's my biggest qualm, is the whole composition, the whole music theory, the whole in-depth music writing isn't as accessible when you turn on the radio, where it's not out there as predominantly as it was back then. And that to me is just like, come on, I want to see it go that direction. But the way that studios are operating nowadays, and it just doesn't seem to be going that way.
Well, I've said this before, and I think Tony said this. It's definitely out there. I mean, Brent Barker is sitting in front of us virtually, but
Oh, I know.
I mean,
I know it's out there. I'm just saying popular. I'm saying popular.
But like you said about your tone, who cares what's popular? We're going to teach our students. I'm going to introduce my students to the people, the players. I mean, it's going to survive. I mean, and there are some big bands. If you look at the festival scene, there's some bands like Humphreys McGee and that have some incredible compositions, and Fish is incredible at composing. And you've got, in the jazz realm, you've still got Pat Metheny still out there writing incredible stuff. You've got guys out there. Tommy Emmanuel's writing. He's constantly writing incredible acoustic music. And Andy McKee, he's always experimenting with alternate tunings, and
Right.
like, he's so cool to listen to. So it's definitely out there, is all I'm getting at.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be mainstream because you're not going to play it at dance clubs.
Well, that's my point. The whole music scene has changed. It's changed quite a bit.
A bit more fragmented, right? Like there's, so much out there that it's kind of hard to hone in on one thing. Popular music. I don't. When you think about even radio, radio's different now in terms of like, there's a satellite radio with some very specific niches on it, and Very different. So it's not like before where there was a very small number of bands by comparison that everybody knew about. Now there's much more bands that a much smaller group of people know about.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, the field has changed, that's for sure.
And as a gigging musician, you don't, you can become known in your area, but not necessarily nationwide, but still be very successful. So, Brent, I don't know how much you tour around, but, I hadn't heard of you until we got in contact with you for this. But now that I've heard you, like I truly enjoyed listening to your EP. And
No,
so
thank you.
you're on my radar now.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Thank you.
once I find people that I like, I keep listening.
I
Have you
mean-
guys heard of this concept called 1,000 true fans?
Well,
Oh
no.
yeah, much better than you'd tell it.
Yeah, the theory is that you can sustain yourself with just 1,000 true fans that are willing to spend, $100, 100 times 1,000, $100,000 on you. With all of the outlets available to a musician today, it seems achievable to find those 1,000 true fans. You might not be a household name like some of the heroes that we're talking about here on this show, but there's a viable opportunity to make a living, not only music, but doing other things as well with a small group. If you're really committed to something that other people believe in and other people like, then it feels like that's maybe more a good model for a musician.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree. And especially in today's environment. Yes, very much so. If you have loyal fans, super fans that follow you.
Yeah, that's right. Super.
Yeah. That's really what it's all about. People who believe in what you do and love what you do, and you connect with them, and you bring them into this community, and you guys are a community. That's all you need, really.
That's why it's so important to be. You not only as a musician you have to hone your craft, but you have to put yourself out there and like talk to the people that come to your shows. And I mean, when I take a break, I may I'll probably go to the bathroom, but I'm gonna I'll play these 3-hour shows, and I'm like out there trying to. If I had noticed somebody really paying attention, I will make a point to go and try to meet them, and oftentimes they're receptive, and if you get to know them, they tend to come back more. They're like, "Oh, do you have a card?" And they might start following you. You've got to do all the jobs when you're a musician. You've got to do the music and everything else. You got to win your fans.
Yeah, it's different than it used to be. I think fans expect that now. They expect a personal connection to the artist. It didn't used to be that way.
Yeah.
I would have never dreamed of going up to Eddie Van Halen and expecting him to even talk to me. And now that would definitely be expected. You're in everybody's pocket if you're on Instagram or what have you. So you've got instant access to everybody. And I think as a musician now, you're right. You kind of have to do all the jobs. You've got to be out there hustling. You've got to make sure that your fans know how to connect to you personally.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the reality we live in today.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is. You have to promote, and you want them to feel as though they're your friend, because ultimately they are. I mean, you're going to build, and you're going to build relationships with these people. They are going to be, people that you talk to on a daily basis, and build a good friendship with these people. That's extremely important. I know for me, whatever it is that I subscribe to, whether it's on any social media platform, when you start getting that engagement with that person and starting to become a personality within that community, that's it. You feel as though you're a part of it, and you're willing to do whatever. I mean, that artist, whoever they are, can ask you for anything, and because you feel as though you're a part of that organic thing that's going on, sure, I'm willing to do whatever you need to do. Hey, I'll give you a couple bucks for your next album. Absolutely. Because if you need funding for it, set up a GoFundMe, and here we go. I'm part of it. Yeah.
You're the perfect super fan, Aaron.
But it's true. There's so many people out there that feel the same way. I mean, I am definitely a part of enough communities out there that I know that within the certain ones that I am a part of, there are many others that feel the same way I do. Whereas, you know, if there's an artist out there that needs something or just needs support, that's it. Even just not even monetary, just support. It's good to have that, to have a fan or fans out there that's got your back. And that's great because then you're building those relationships, and that's a really good thing to have. You're part of something. And isn't that really what it's all about? You're just kind of being part of this thing and kind of getting yourself out there, and that makes you feel good as a person, kind of just reaching out and touching someone. Reach out and touch someone. For all you younger buzzards out there, they may not know what that is.
Yeah, I don't know what it is.
Right. I'm sure Brent does.
I got you, man.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So yeah, community is really, really important. I think that our environment today is very much changing in the music industry. Very, very, very much.
But it goes back to the topic of the day. You know, you have to develop a tone and a style, so when people hear you, they know it's you. I mean, I used to listen to, I'm trying to think of the song. There was a song that came out with the singer from Matchbox 20. It was smooth, and you know, Carlos Santana's playing guitar behind him. I'm like, that sounds like Carlos Santana. Obviously it was.
Yeah.
But like, you know, you got to develop a sound, and it when people like your sound, sometimes it's good to stick with it, and sometimes it's good to let it evolve and try to bring your audience with you.
Yeah, there's certain artists that come to mind that definitely have stuck true to themselves and have kept up that same sound. But on the other hand, there are definitely a bunch of artists that I can think of who have evolved through the years and have changed their sound and who have evolved with the times. So it's
Carlos Santana is a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
He doesn't sound like he did at the beginning. If you listen to Black Magic Woman or some of those earlier recordings, compared to his, at least tone wise, he's got a much thicker modern overdrive in his newer stuff.
Yeah, but Carlos is always Carlos. He's always going to sound like Carlos.
Yeah, I mean, I think note choice wise, yes.
Yeah, he's got that Dorian sound.
Mm-hmm.
The guy that engineered my record for me, Blackbird, won a Grammy for that song "Smooth" by Santana.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. So so he recorded it. He said that they did maybe 4 takes. Okay. Of each song. You know, Carlos just plays 4 takes live. All of them you can use, and they just kind of pick and choose what they're gonna put together.
Right.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I noticed you actually pulled in quite a few cool people from for your EP. You've got Steve Vai's drummer.
Yeah. Guy named Chris Frazier. He's currently the drummer for Foreigner. He was with Whitesnake before that. So he's but what's great about him was he's got that fusion background that came from early Steve Vai. So he played on the Passion and Warfare album,
right?
And some other things with him before that. So he definitely had all the fusion jazz chops, but he's also been a solid rock drummer with, you know, big arena bands. So he could do both. So he could get, you know, the fusion thing on when he wanted to, like he does in some places, but he could also just keep it really straight and heavy. And just a super nice guy. And the bass player, Brad Lang, was from a band called Y&T, who's with for a while. He's been with Rat, done a couple different things. All 3 of us actually met at the Ronnie Montrose Remembered event in LA this year in January. And we went playing together. So Chris and I played on a song together, and we said, well, this just feels too good. We got to work together.
Right.
So we decided to do it. So great connection. You know, always if you ever get opportunities to go play with people, you never know where it's going to lead.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
So my advice to anybody out there is just say yes to everything. Because you never know.
What was the writing process for those 4 songs? Did you have those mapped out and then gave them to the other guys, or was that more of an organic type of thing that you did in the studio, or how did that happen?
So I had it 100% mapped out in advance, and I sent them each the tracks, but I didn't include drums or bass on it. So those recordings they're just like you hear on the record, same arrangement, same everything, but it's just rhythm, guitar, and lead. And I thought to myself, a guy as good as Chris on the drums would be like, I'm sure Jimmy Page didn't go to John Bonham and say, oh, I'm going to play this drum part for you, and I want you to play this, right? He'd probably say, you do that.
Right.
Here's how the guitar goes.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we work together. So they wrote their own parts to those songs, I guess, and I tried not to give them much direction. I really wanted to know what they would where they would take it.
How much in advance did you give them that?
Couple months.
Okay.
Couple months. They knew it was coming for a while, and then we rehearsed 2 days as a band, and then we recorded in Nashville. It's a lot of fun. Just had a blast. We were making so much noise. We were at SIR Studios in Nashville, and we were so loud that all the bands were like, who is that? Who's in that room back there? Those guys are just
crushing it.
Yelling it back there.
Yeah.
They're murdering things.
That's awesome.
So when you got together as a band, did they bring any did they make any changes? Not that it's right or wrong, but did the songs evolve at all when you brought in the other players?
I think there was one part where we added 4 beats because it was missing a measure, felt a little bit off. And other than that, no, we didn't change arrangements, but they definitely came up with parts that were a little bit different than what I was hearing in my head, which is what I wanted, because I think what we can fall into, especially now in the age of home studios, is you do everything on your own. Everybody can create an album 100% on their own now. And I've done that before. And what I've found is that it's just never as good as it is when you can collaborate with somebody that's an expert at what they do.
Here. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just it makes for a better listening experience for the listener if it's not all from the brain of one person. That's why you take a great classic band, Rush, perfect example, right? I mean, I'm sure Alex Lifeson could create a phenomenal album on his own, but it would be better if he had Geddy and Neil in the room, right, to kind of do their own thing and take it in a new direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And any one of these guys who are in their home studios, sure, you can come up with some pretty sick drum beats, if you're a guitar player, but someone who's honed that craft for years and years and years as a drummer, I want to give that task to them because they know that the best, and they're
going to hear it differently, and they're going to hear it differently, which is going to, I think, if you've got the right player and you've got a good chemistry and they know you kind of got a good musical dialogue going on, they're gonna make it better, quote unquote, I think, overall, to where it reaches a point where you could listen to it over and over and over and over, which is always the true test of a great record. You can hear it over and over and you don't really get tired of it. And I think that's more likely to happen when you have some collaboration going on rather than just the mind of one person doing every single thing.
I'm gonna say that I completely agree, to preface this, but I used to play in bands, and I have not played in a band consistently since I moved to Virginia Beach. So I have found that I can make a living playing solo, but it's really hard to find the gigs that pay a full band enough, unless you're playing like in a really popular cover band. And I haven't wanted to go that route, but I can go out and play on my own using looping pedals, looping systems, and I'm successful like that. Have you ever gone out and just played solo?
I'm considering it, and in fact, I'm considering it now for kind of the same reason, because I've got to hustle, and every day's got to be bringing in some monetization from music, right? So I've thought about that, and you know, I've seen kind of the looping pedal thing,
Mm-hmm.
and I've thought, well, should I just record backing tracks, you know, which I can do in a studio and play that, or should I use the pedals? I'm not quite sure. Tell us about your experience. Like, how did that work out for you? How did you? Well, I understand kind of the need because I'm interested in it myself. But walk us through the mechanics. How do you do it? You use pedals, and why pedals
Yeah.
versus backing track? What do you do?
Absolutely. There are other people around Virginia Beach that use different approaches, but I've heard people with backing tracks. I've heard people with I think it's the Boss RC30 looping pedal. I used to use a Digitech Jam Man, but personally, I found this. It's the Trio Plus, Digitech Harman Trio Plus. It's significantly better than the Trio that they put out before. And what's so cool about it is that you can, it takes micro SD memory cards, and you can fit 12 tracks on a memory card, and each of those tracks you can have different song parts. So you can have you can pre-loop an intro, a verse, a chorus, a bridge, whatever, and it'll play endlessly until you want to change it. So if I go to take a solo, maybe I'll go to the verse or whatever, or the chorus for that song, and I'll just improvise, and I'll look around and see who's paying attention, and I'll gauge how long I'm going to play. I mean, sometimes I'll just play, and then I don't have to worry about, okay, I have 16 bars,
Right.
and then the track's going to keep going. It's, in some songs that's good, but I like, for a lot of songs, to have that open-ended, like I can just play as long as I want. Sometimes I pick up my harmonicas or whatever. Sometimes I'll just talk to the crowd in that vamp. And the Trio is really good because I think Trio should, or Digitech should sponsor me for this this wonderful
How about it?
what I'm saying about it. I think
Yeah.
it's an incredible tool because you can set the style. So you can set it to rock or metal or alternative rock or jazz, Latin, folk, country, blues, and within each of those you have 9 different styles in 4/4 time and 3 in 3/4/6/8. And if you look at the manual, it's actually like, if you look at blues, one of them's like a 1950s Chicago blues style, and one of them's more of a Texas blues style.
Mm.
And you can change how busy the bass is, from very busy to just mostly roots and fifths to staying just on the root of each chord. You can change the drums you can change it from more of a verse feel to a chorus feel, and the drums will go from the hi-hat to the ride cymbal. And it really is, you can do all this with your feet while you're playing. It's awesome.
So it's preloaded tracks then, or do you
can
create your own track?
No, you create your own. I do most of them at home, and I have a list that has what songs are in each memory card. Some songs, like, I'll play Herbie Hancock's Chameleon often, and that's just, it's just a vamp. So I do that live. If it's a song that has 4 chords repeating for the whole song, I'll do it live. But there's a lot of songs. If I'm going to do a jazz track, I don't necessarily, if it's a ballad, like something like Misty, I don't want to spend a minute playing the chords and then
to set it up, right?
Set it up it'll create drums and bass that fits that. Somehow it reads what you're playing. You have to be fairly simple with it the first time through, at least rhythmically, and don't put crazy extensions on your chords. Like if it's a G dominant 7, don't add a sharp 11 or whatever weird on it. But then you have to play it again to loop your guitar part. So if it's something long, it's just much better to do it ahead of time. And if it has multiple song parts, it's crucial. You got to do it ahead of time because you can't really do that effectively.
So how many hours can you play with
I can
your
go out and play.
preload?
I can play at a bar. I can play 4 hours, and then if I can go into more jazz, I could play for probably 6 hours without repeating myself. But my My fingers would hurt. My voice would be.
How, just out of curiosity, have you ever looked into Ableton Live?
I have Ableton Live.
Okay. And have you ever used that on stage?
I've never used it on stage. I know they may. I've seen some really cool videos of people getting the external controllers.
Right. Yes.
That I've seen like a video of a guy with an acoustic guitar and he's got it attached to the body just beyond the bridge, behind the bridge, and it sounds super cool what he's doing. I haven't gone that route because I'm so busy and
it's time intensive
using my system and
yeah. No, it's definitely time intensive. I've seen some pretty amazing one-man shows using Ableton Live, and you sit there and you're like, wow, this is really impressive. It obviously takes a lot of preparation to get to that point, but yeah, absolutely. There are many ways you can actually do it. It's just whatever feels comfortable to you.
Yeah. Or you could just be a acoustic badass like Tommy Emmanuel and all you need is your guitar.
Right.
But that's not my
Does he do shows with just acoustic guitar?
Yeah, he's insanely good. I mean, if you haven't heard him, and for all the fret buzzards out there, Tommy Emmanuel is an Australian acoustic guitarist. He'll sing a little bit, but he usually plays his shows by himself. He's one man with an acoustic guitar on a huge stage, and I'd be willing to say he might be the best acoustic player in the world right now. I mean, at least in his style.
Gauntlets are thrown.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear other people's ideas. I mean, I mentioned Andy McKee earlier, and there are other people of different styles, but his sounds, because he uses the kind of a Chet Atkins style, sometimes the way he'll alternate his thumb. He's playing the bass lines with his thumb, and he's playing the melody with his fingers on the upper strings. And he sounds, and sometimes he'll add percussion on the acoustic guitar. He sounds easily like three people playing all the time.
Rodrigo y Gabriela type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome. I love listening to Tommy Emmanuel. And they make these harp guitars now that you can get they have the bass strings. Oh, they're so cool. Actually, you're out. That brings me to another point. I was in Phoenix last December, and I went to the Musical Instrument Museum.
Oh, you've been to that place, huh?
It is the coolest museum on the face of the planet, in my opinion.
It is. It's literally a history, a museum that contains an example of every single type of instrument from history, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Guitars that you have to see it to believe it. So easier if you just Google the website.
It's worth going.
Yeah,
it's worth traveling to Phoenix to go there.
That's cool.
It is a magical place.
That's cool. They have a petting zoo, a musical instrument petting zoo. It's pretty awesome too. You can play the Japanese gamelan.
Tell me about the musical petting zoo. I'm not aware of that.
That's cool.
Oh, yeah. I went in there. I got to play like the Japanese gamelan. It was awesome.
Nice.
That's sick.
I mean, it's basically like a xylophone kind of instrument, but larger with kind of like brass bells instead of keys or bars like a xylophone. Yeah, I mean, they just have all kinds of stuff. It's an awesome museum.
Cool.
I could spend days there.
Definitely gonna have to check that out.
And if you're interested in that kind of stuff, we did an episode on world music a while back. You can go back in our backlog and check that out.
Yeah. Before we end this, what's in your future, Brent?
So I'm working on an album, as I mentioned earlier, with Keith St. John and James Kotak. That'll be out next year. It's called St. John. I'm also working on an album I was hired to do for a prog rock band called Desert Dragons out of LA.
Okay.
And I will be doing more instrumental music coming soon.
Beautiful.
So my album's out. It's doing well on radio, and I just released a video on YouTube for the lead track called Horizon. So please check that out.
Absolutely. Tell everybody where we can go to find all about you, sir.
So BrentBarkerMusic.com, if you'd like to buy physical CDs, to download the album digitally on iTunes, Brent Barker, and then Brent Barker Music on Spotify for streaming.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah. It's fun to listen to. So
yeah.
Thanks, thanks, guys.
Yeah, well,
really
thank you for
appreciate
coming.
it.
Absolutely, we'd love to have you on in the future. Check up on you and see how you're doing.
Yeah, and
that was awesome.
Tony.
Yeah, and yeah. Unfortunately, Tony couldn't be with us tonight, but he's in our thoughts. But yeah, thank you so much for doing this. We really do appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank
awesome
you.
Awesome way to meet somebody.
Yeah, very much so. Well, thank you again, and you have yourself a good night, sir.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Yep. Bye.